The Big 12, the best college basketball conference in the nation, is expanding, but is it getting better or is it just getting bigger?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Big 12 Monday and welcome in to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a 5 times per week daily national college hoop show, part, of course, of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, Isaac, we are continuing our conference preview series where we're discussing every single college basketball conference in the country. We are very close to being done with this. We started this back in September. It's been fantastic to get a chance to look at all of these different conferences, from the MEAC and the NEC all the way up to the big boys like we're talking about today with the Big 12 Conference. And Isaac, there is a ton to talk about with the Big 12, new schools, new future schools, new coaches, a ton of new talent. There's a lot going on, and we're going to get to as much of it as we can here on the show. But before we get into that, I kind of want to pose the question that we talked about in that cold open there about whether this conference with this current cycle of additions, which is, of course, Houston, Central Florida, Cincinnati, and BYU. And then we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming addition, the Four Corner schools, Arizona and Arizona State, as well as Colorado and Utah. It feels like this is a conference that is definitely getting better with some top-end schools coming in, but there's also a lot of schools coming in that maybe aren't going to move the needle as much from a men's basketball perspective. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on how much is this conference getting better versus just getting bigger, and which one do you think is better overall for the Big 12 conference?
What's better, bigger, better?
Right, exactly.
Andy, you bring up such a good point there, because I mean, clearly, let's not bury the lead. Houston is right up there with Kansas. We expect Kelvin Sampson to just keep this thing rolling. There's no transition period. It's like, hello, here we are. Clearly, UCF, Cincinnati, BYU does not bring the same level of cachet, at least right now. Who knows as they get into Big 12 land what they'll end up doing. But, I started looking at Ken Palm numbers last year. Last year, all 10 Big 12 teams finished in the top 63. 7 of the 10 were in the top 30. It's just silly and stupid. For reference, here's where the 4 new teams finished last year. Andy, Houston was second in the nation. So would have been first. That would have been higher than Kansas, higher than Baylor, anybody, Texas. Cincinnati was 50, UCF 56, and BYU 77. So they're right in the mix of that, keeping it to the floor. How about that? The floor is not too terribly low. Now, that's not going to compete with that tip top and those 7 schools that were in the top 30 last year, but it's not going to bring down the butt of this thing as much as I think maybe a lot of people would think it would. One of the comparisons I often make in my head is like the ACC had been, top 3 conference in America for so long, and things have started to taper off as all those Big East schools came in. There's more like there's the bigger rather than the better. And I think there's potential for that with the Big 12, especially next year, as you referenced, when you lose Texas and Oklahoma, which one of those is a harder loss than another basketball wise right now. But you bring in Arizona. And so I would say that it is the floor is high enough that I will say better. I didn't think that would be my answer maybe earlier this summer, but as I start to look at the numbers and see what things could be, I'm willing to say better. Obviously bigger, that's baked into it. But I think I think better is going to be my answer. What about you?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how these schools adjust as they get into the Big 12, whether it creates an opportunity for them to do things like facility upgrades because they're making more money. Recruiting is an interesting one. I think a lot of people assume, you go into the you go to the Big 12 from the AAC or from the WCC, and you're just automatically going to get better recruits. And it's like, there's still the same number of schools and the same number of high school players and transfers out there. Like, you still have to compete with the same programs. And yeah, maybe it gives you a bit of a bump. And I do think that coaches are going to use that. If you're, at Cincinnati or BYU, you're going to be selling, we're playing Kansas, we're playing Baylor, we're playing Houston. Like, you got an opportunity to beat some of the best teams in the country. And I do think that'll help in the future. I don't know how much it'll help right now. You look at the roster changes that these programs have made, and certainly there's some fun additions at BYU and at Cincinnati, but I think it's one of those things where the automatic assumption that these programs are going to take a leap may not happen. You use the ACC example, like, sure, you got somebody like, like a Miami or somebody who comes in and starts having success, and you got Boston College who doesn't, like, it doesn't always translate in that way. So I think the Big 12 is definitely getting bigger. There's no debate about that. And I do think that some of these programs will start to improve as they go along. But for right now, I think that, are all these schools going to be top 75 teams? Their schedule's better. For the BYU, you're not going to lose to LMU because you're not going to play LMU.
That's right.
And if you lose to Baylor or Kansas, it doesn't hurt as much. But if you lose to West Virginia and Central Florida, like, that hurts more than, if those teams weren't in the conference. Like, there's some more opportunities for bad losses, which could drag that down a little bit.
And it's interesting because all of this doesn't happen in a vacuum, because Andy, at the same time, all of these conferences are going to be getting bigger. And so we'll have to watch that as well. In terms of Torvik, I was looking at Torvik because he already has his projections up. He has 13 of the 14 teams in the top 75, with UCF, the lone team outside. I think they were 99th when I looked at it. So, we'll have to wait and see what comes out of it. Going to be very interesting to see if the money matters more than the depth. So, Andy, as we look at you talk about all this newness, and that includes talent, because I was looking back at the Big 12 first team, second team, and third team from last year, 5 players on each. Thank you, Big 12, for not being the Pac-12. Anyway, of those 15 players, one of them, Andy, is returning to his same school. The first team, all gone. Second team, all gone. Only the third team has Kevin McCullar coming back to Kansas. Now, to be fair, LJ Cryer was on the third team, and he's back in the Big 12, but he moves from Baylor to Houston. And so, Andy, as you look at that, what does that, in your opinion, do to the identity of a conference?
It gives them a chance for potentially a bit of a reset, and we'll talk about it more later. Obviously, there is a lot of talent out the door, as you just alluded to, but there is a whole bunch of talent in the door as well. And picking a first team, it's hard to ignore how many great transfers there are coming into the conference. And I think it's a conference that in a vacuum didn't lose as much talent as it gained, even though they lost, guys like Jalen Wilson and Grady Dick and the three guard monster at Baylor, with the exception of Cryer. Like, this is a conference that continues to replenish talent with more talent, and it does allow them to, somebody like Hunter Dickinson is a different player than the Big 12 sometimes has. So it creates a little bit of a uniqueness in terms of teams having to have different defensive identities, potentially having different offensive identities. Like, Baylor's going to look a lot different with Jacoby Walter and Ray J. Dennis at guard instead of Flagler and George and Cryer. So it's fun to see these teams have to make adjustments and look a little bit differently. And of course, they're also going to play a new crop of schools as well. So I think it's fun. I think it's exciting. But yeah, your first and second teams are going to look, there's not going to be anybody on them who was on the last year, so it's going to be fun.
And I think let's not also miss that there are guys that are still in this conference that are going to raise up from last year that we may not have seen land on one of these 3 teams, but are absolute dudes who are still here. And so between what you said, transfers, freshmen, and guys still sticking around, it's going to be another fun year in the Big 12, Andy.
Yeah, no doubt. And we got some coaching changes too, is real quick. Obviously, the big one is the Rodney Terry taking over at Texas. He took over midseason last year after Chris Beard's firing, helped lead that team to an Elite Eight. A guy who's got a lot of experience, coached at UTEP, coached at Fresno State, assistant coach at Baylor for a long time. So I'm excited to see what Rodney Terry looks like, getting some of his guys in the transfer portal this year, a new look roster for Texas, and how that shakes out with Ace Smith and all the other newcomers. there in Austin. And then Texas Tech, new coach as well, Grant McCaslin, coming over from North Texas, had been there since 2017. A guy who had a lot of success with that team. Tyler Perry, who's now, of course, at Kansas State, really phenomenal player for that team. So I'm excited to see what he does with the Red Raiders. And then West Virginia, Bob Huggins had his Bob Huggins off season. We don't need to litigate all of that again on this show. He's out. Josh Ehlert takes over as the interim head coach, created a very unique roster situation for West Virginia. They lost a lot of players late in the portal. So 3 programs that's going to be really interesting to see how they do with new coaches this year. And
I don't think I had really thought about the fact that 2 of those 3 career cratering moments were within this same conference. Although I say career cratering, Chris Beard's right back in the SEC. So maybe I'm wrong there. And Andy, it's funny because we've got these 2 guys, Bill Self and Scott Drew, who have been at their schools for literally 2 decades at this point, since 03-04. But the gap between those guys and the rest of the conference is massive. Kelvin Sampson is the next longest tenured head coach, been at Houston since 14-15. But obviously he's just stepping into the conference. So pretty wild. We got these 2 elder statesmen and then everyone else trying to get there. Going to be interesting to watch. Well, Andy, last week, the Big 12 preseason poll came out, both in terms of the preseason rankings and the preseason awards and predictions. We'll get to those soon. We want to talk about the poll right now. Andy, we've made our choices. Do the coaches agree with us? We're going to find out just how wacky and wild we are in just a second. But first, this episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Game Time. Andy, I just realized that Nate Bargatze, my favorite comedian right now, is going to be close to me this coming Friday. So I got to take Maggie, my wife, to go on a date Friday. I need last-minute tickets. Where am I going? Game Time. No brainer. Let's make it happen. I know that they're going to have the tickets I need. I know that it's going to be a good price. And I know that right in the app, I can see what the view looks like from my seat. So it's so easy to want to use Game Time. Game Time is this fast and easy way to buy tickets for any event, not just stand-up comedy, football, basketball, baseball, music, theater, comedy, whatever it is, you name it, they've got it. And in addition to that feature I love with the view from your seat, I really like that they have this lowest price guarantee, the event cancellation protection, all this stuff makes you feel comfortable to go ahead and buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Well, Isaac, Game Time is not the only app you should absolutely be downloading to help you out this sports season, because we got Prize Picks. And folks, Prize Picks offers weekly promotions that can lead to huge payouts, like their Taco Tuesday deal. Every Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to give you even more value. Plus, with the Prize Picks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For NFL games and college football top 25 matchups, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. This is unprecedented in the daily fantasy sports platform. Prize Picks is the only one that has this injury insurance. And look, this app, guys, it's super easy to use. You just pick 2 or more players. You choose more or less with the given statistic that shows up. You want to bet more on Patrick Mahomes for yardage. You want to bet more on Justin Jefferson for yardage from the Minnesota Vikings. All of that, you can just smash that more button every single time. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy made easy. Folks, speaking of college football, the college football season is right in the middle of it, and Locked On is kicking up our coverage with the Locked On College Football Kickoff Live, airing every Friday from 11 a.m. to noon Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. You can find it every Friday from 11 to noon Eastern on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You're not going to want to miss it. But Isaac, let's get back into our tiers here. Our conversation on the Big 12, the best college basketball conference in America. Big East giving them a run, but the Big 12 looks really strong once again. And folks, we listed all the teams in the Big 12 currently. We're not dealing with Arizona and Arizona State and the corner schools just yet, but looking at the tiers as we have them right now, we're going to compare this to the actual Big 12 poll. So right now, tier 1, Kansas and Houston. With you on that right there. I think that's pretty safe that those are your top 2 teams. Tier 2, Texas, Baylor, TCU, and Kansas State. I think I'm with you there as well. Top 6 teams I think are fairly set right now.
Yes.
And I think that's a good way to kind of break them up.
Andy, I love it when you don't think I'm an idiot. This is awesome.
Well, we haven't gotten to tier 3 yet.
Oh, no. I spoke just in the wrong time.
Texas Tech, Iowa State, and Cincinnati in tier 3. I would probably flip Cincinnati and West Virginia. I think Texas Tech and Iowa State definitely fit here in tier 3. I think they're kind of that 7-8 range in the conference. I'd probably put West Virginia in tier 3, put Cincinnati in tier 4 alongside Oklahoma State, and then BYU also in tier 4. Might move them to tier 5 with Oklahoma and Central Florida. I think there's a real chance that BYU does grow and does produce quality basketball in the future, but this team wasn't very good last year. They made some good additions, but I wouldn't be surprised if the only team in the Big 12 that they beat this year is Central Florida. So I would probably have them in that 5th tier, at least for right now.
All right, that's all fair stuff. Andy, let me tell you why I put West Virginia where I did. I love like Jesse Edwards. I think is going to be an absolute stud, and I love some of these guys. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some circling the bandwagons kind of stuff, and we're okay. But I just feel like is it gonna happen, or is it just going to be an absolute dumpster fire? I don't know, but I was hedging my bet that it would be more dumpster fiery than circle the wagonsy. But with what you said about BYU, I can totally buy that. Yeah. Interesting that 2 of the newcomers, BYU and UCF, you would have down in tier 5 at the bottom, with Oklahoma, the departing school. So how interesting that we got Texas right up near the top and Oklahoma right down near the bottom, bookending this thing as they head out next year to the SEC. So Andy, let's look at, as you mentioned, how that compares then to what the coaches actually voted on for the preseason Big 12 poll. Well, so we've got Kansas and Houston right at the top, just like we did with our tiers. In fact, they were the only 2 schools that received first place votes.
So far, so good.
Yeah, right. We're in a good place. Kansas got 12 of the 14. Houston got 2. Coaches can't vote for themselves, so it's Bill Self and somebody else that voted for Houston, is what that tells you. After that, we had in ours Texas, Baylor, TCU, and Kansas State. Texas, Baylor, TCU, and Kansas State. I'm happy as I read this because we purposely have not yet looked at how it lined up. We're doing this in real time because this is awesome. All right, next in tier 3 for us was Texas Tech, Iowa State, and Cincinnati. Andy, as he said, would flip West Virginia into tier 3. And wouldn't you know it, the coaches have what would be 7, 8, and 9 as Iowa State. We've got them there. And Texas Tech, we got them. But then West Virginia, that's where I fell off, Andy. And then 10, 11, 12, who I had as West Virginia, Oklahoma State, and BYU. They have Oklahoma State, great, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma. So they had Oklahoma a little bit higher than we did. And then with BYU and UCF at the bottom. So, Andy, nothing too terribly off, I think, in our tiers there. Just a little bit of nitpicking here and there, although I think you would have been more on it with your tiers than I would have. So, you know what? You win. Congrats to you, sir.
I was going to say coaches aren't always right either, so I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, darn right they're not. I know. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I think this is well laid out. I think it to me, definitely you have a top 2 in Kansas and Houston, and then you have 3, 4, 5, and 6, Texas, Baylor, TCU, Kansas State. Like those are 2 really obvious dividing lines in my mind. And then after that, I think it can get a little bit more muddled. I do think Iowa State and Texas Tech probably kind of round out the top 8 fairly obviously. I think that's kind of where that cut is. And then after that, anybody from West Virginia, Cincinnati, Oklahoma, even BYU, I think could kind of climb into the bottom half of the top 10. But I definitely think there's 8 teams kind of right sturdy there for this year, this conference this year.
Well, and keeping in mind that on this very list last year, TCU was dead last. So, or excuse me, Kansas State was dead last. And so, we all looked dumb when that came to fruition. Right. And Andy, by the way, really cool. Kansas at Houston to end the regular season on Saturday, March 9th should be awesome. Andy, let's go ahead then and pick who we each have as our regular season champs and our conference tournament champs for the Big 12.
Yeah, I'm going Kansas for the regular season. I
What?
think that,
No, come on.
right, shocker. I do think their depth is maybe a little bit more tested than it has been in the past. But again, Bill Self doesn't really play his depth very often. I think Elmarco Jackson's an excellent guard to have coming off the bench. And I think that starting like DeJuan Harris is a great distributor, good defensive player. Kevin McCullar coming back, fantastic defensive player as well. So you got
Adams coming back. Yeah.
Right. You got really good defensive anchors. You got shooting with Timberlake coming in. You got a great offensive low post threat in Hunter Dickinson. Like, I just think that the group that Bill Self has in terms of how he likes to play stylistically really fits well. And I'm not that concerned about the depth being more minimal, because that's just hasn't been something that has been a big issue for the Jayhawks in the past. But I don't have them winning the conference tournament. I picked a bit of a wild card here, and I went with
This is a rock shock Jayhawk.
Yeah, well, there you go. Jerome Tang's a fantastic coach.
I'm so sorry, Andy.
Not that Bill Self and Kelvin Sampson and others are not, but I think that this Kansas State team might need a little bit of gelling with, they have to replace Marquise Noel, have to replace Keontae Johnson, but I love the additions of Arthur Kaluma. I love the addition of Tyler Perry. I think this is a team that by the time March rolls around might be playing some really good basketball, and it wouldn't shock me at all to see them win a few games. Even if they're coming in as like a 5 or a 6 seed, it wouldn't shock me to see them put together a few good games and win that Big 12, the automatic bid that they won't certainly need, but that will help them with maybe a boost on the seed line there coming into March.
Absolutely. Andy, I'm right with you on the regular season champ. I picked Kansas too. Until somebody comes and yanks them off of that throne, I'm just going to continue picking them. Mm-hmm. I love having I love when a team has a stud freshman like an Elmarco Jackson, but doesn't have to rely on him. Like, if you're able to bring him off the bench, which we think it'll either be he or Nick Timberlake coming off the bench, or at least in my opinion. I shouldn't put words in your mouth there. But to have that, man, what a luxury that is. And so, yes, Kansas was 361st out of 363 teams in the nation in bench usage last year. So there's that. And then I'm going to go with Texas for my conference tournament champion. It's interesting because I don't think they're a very deep team either, but I think that, Rodney Terry, just in his first full year, I don't know that he'll have the chops to guide through that Big 12 gauntlet. But man, when it comes time for Big 12 play, that he showed he could navigate through the NCAA tournament last year, showed he could navigate through the Big 12 tournament last year. I just think it all comes together. And a lot of this is going to be reliant on Caden Shedrick's health and on Dylan Dessou's health. We're still, a couple weeks out here wondering how ready to go they will both be. So give me Kansas, give me Texas. You got Kansas and Kansas State, man. Kansas is very happy right now. Andy, in such a deep and talent-rich conference, it's nearly impossible for us to make award predictions and first-team all-conference predictions. But you and I, we laugh in the face of impossibility, my friend. Awards and predictions coming up in just a second. But first, now it's time for your Game Changer of the Week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. Much like Victor Wembanyama has been just doing it up right out of the gate in preseason NBA stuff, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good, full flavor, well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use Locked On to get 15% off your first online order. That's code Locked On at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. So, Andy, we get to a place now, most of the time to this point, we've just been prognosticating on our own preseason poll and our own preseason first team, but now we're actually starting to get some of them out there. So let me drop for us the Big 12 first team preseason, and then we'll look at who you and I agreed with and who you and I chose differently. It's fun to be able to do it this way now. So the Big 12's actual preseason first team is LJ Cryer, we talked about earlier, was on the third team last year, coming back. was at Baylor, obviously last year, part of that 3-guard lineup you talked about, now at Houston. The big guy, and you've talked about him as well, but Hunter Dickinson coming in to play for Kansas from Michigan. DeJuan Harris, who will be Hunter Dickinson's point guard. Emmanuel Miller, a Texas A&M transfer who's coming to TCU. And then Max Asmus, obviously coming from Oral Roberts to Texas. By the way, in the Big 12 release, it actually said Max Abmams. So A-B-M-A-S is how you spell his name. A-B-M-A-M-S. So forevermore shall he be Ax Abmams. I love it. So Andy, there are those 5 guys: Cryer, Dickinson, Harris, Emmanuel Miller, and Max Asmus. Who did you have in common with the Big 12 actual first team, and who did you differ on?
Well, so the Big 12 actual top 5 had 3 transfers and 2 returnees in Harris and Miller. Everybody else was a transfer. And for me, I went with the 3 transfers: Hunter Dickinson, LJ Cryer, Max Asmus. And then I picked 2 more transfers as well. I picked all incoming transfers this year, first team. Is it likely? I don't know. Is it possible? Absolutely. Because to me, Dickinson, Cryer, and Asmus, I don't want to say locks. I don't know that anybody's a lock, although Dickinson and Cryer are pretty close to locks, I think, if those teams do what they're supposed to do. Asmus, if he's Texas's leading scorer, which feels very plausible, especially with some injury issues in the front court for them, I think he's in that conversation as well. And then my 2 additions, instead of Miller, instead of Harris, are Tyler Perry at Kansas State, a guy who averaged 17 points per game last year at North Texas. I think he's going to be phenomenal. We saw what Jerome Tang did with Marquise Noel. Not necessarily saying they're going to be the exact same player, just saying that we've seen that archetype succeed in that program in the past. And then I'm going with Jameer Nelson Jr., Delaware transfer, joining Jamie Dixon's team at the Horned Frogs at Texas Christian. He's a 20-point per game scorer. Again, TCU is looking to replace their point guard from last year, and I think that there's a real chance that Nelson puts up similar, maybe not 20 points per game, but a good enough production to be in that conversation as a first-teamer.
Whew, I love it. Andy, it's so hard in this stinking conference to pick out dudes, but we're doing it. And again, we laugh in the face of impossibility. The only person I had in common.
You are way different, my friend.
I know. I was trying to spread this wealth out because Hunter Dickinson, I have him on there, but I've got 4 different guys in the actual Big 12 team. Although one in common with you, I also have Tyler Perry. What's interesting, I hadn't thought about this until you were just talking about it. He now transfers conferences and will have to face his former coach. When they played Texas Tech. So how funny is that? But then the other 3 guys I went with, Jamal Shed at Houston. I really battled over he and LJ Cryer. And I just thought, Shed is the dude that's been there. He's going to be kind of the guy that makes this team go. I think LJ Cryer's ceiling is higher, but I think the steadiness and consistency of Shed is what I'm going with there. I've got Dylan Dessou from Texas. I'm with you. I think that Max Asmus is probably the leading scorer. But just everything Dessou was doing, in the NCAA tournament, 22.5 points, 10 rebounds a game. I know there was that injury, and we don't know how healthy he is. But if he is healthy, I think there's a great chance he could be Texas's best player this year. And then same kind of thing. I wanted a Baylor player, and I was going between Jalen Bridges, the Toledo transfer Ray J. Dennis, and the freshman Jacoby Walter. And ultimately, I actually landed on Bridges kind of for a similar reason to Jamal Shed, where I think he's the guy that's been in Waco, and that just all the things he can bring to the table for Coach Drew is really impressive. Andy, player of the year, out of those 5, who you going with?
I'm going with Dickinson. It's boring. It's boring. It's predictable, but Bill Self loves his big men. He loves low post scoring threats. Dickinson can do that. He's averaged 18 points per game multiple times. He's played at a high level. I think the adjustment of the Big 12 won't be super significant for him. He might have some off nights, but at the end of the day, I think he's going to be the best player on the best team, and that's probably going to win him Player of the Year.
Yeah, especially with DeJuan Harris setting him up, man. You can't oof. I'm just not. There are days when I'm like, really? Do I see it? I think I do because of what you said about Bill Self and Biggs, but I actually went with Tyler Perry. So he's going to be my pick for Player of the Year. Coach of the Year. Andy, we just talked about him, but who's yours?
Yeah, I'm going with Tyler Perry's old coach, Grant McCasland at Texas Tech. Again, Texas Tech went 5-13 last year in conference play. They're going to be better than that this year. If they are a 500 or above 500 team in conference play, if they're a team that earns themselves a bid in the NCAA tournament, both things that I think are very possible. I think McCaslin takes it. I don't think Jerome Tang gets it twice in a row. I'm not sure if we'll see it go to Drew or Self or anybody like that. It could, of course. Those guys are fantastic coaches. But for me, if Tech turns this thing around, I think McCaslin takes the award.
I'm going with Rodney Terry on his way out the door. It's his first and only full year as the Texas head coach. As long as the Longhorns are top 3 or 4 in this conference, people love him. People are so glad he got the job. I'm going with Rodney Terry. Andy, transfer of the year. By definition, since we both picked transfers for our player of the year, we've got to take them. As you've said all along, there's a ton of phenomenal transfers in this league. It could be anyone. But with that said, Andy, we're trying to cruise through this thing. Let's go with our freshman of the year.
Yeah. For freshman of the year, I'm going with Jacoby Walter at Baylor. We touched on him a little bit earlier. Certainly Baylor's had impact freshman guards in the very recent past, like Keontae George last year. Jacoby Walker, top 10 prospect in the class of 2023, 6'5" guard. I like the pairing with Ray J. Dennis. I like Scott Drew's ability to develop guards. I think that combination of things should allow Walter to be one of the most productive freshmen literally in the entire country. And I think that we're going to see him be the best freshman in this conference.
Yeah, I'm going with Iowa State's Omaha Biliou, who is the highest ranked recruit in Iowa State history, believe it or not. Should slide right into the starting lineup. Hard not to go with Walter, quite honestly, but just, again, want to get some of the different names out there. And I think Biliou has a great shot at getting there. Andy, let's wrap this whole conversation up looking at how many teams this Big 16 is going to get into the NCAA tournament. I'm going to set the over-under at 8.5.
I'm going 9. I'm going with 9 teams who are going to make the big dance. I'm Kansas, Houston, obvious. Texas, Baylor, Kansas State, TCU, all pretty obvious. That's kind of the top 6. I think they're all making it. Give me Iowa State as well. Give me Texas Tech as well. And then give me West Virginia. And that's the interesting one. Like you said, the bottom could totally fall out. And this team could be a disaster all year long. They have players who are very good, but have been challenges for their team in the past. We'll see how a backcourt of Raekwon Battle and Kirk Risa could be great, could be not so great. So I'm leaning West Virginia puts it together and ends up making the big dance. Give me 9 teams out of the Big 12.
What's funny is that's the hinge team that puts me under. I have everything the same as you other than West Virginia. As I alluded to earlier, I just think it's more of a dumpster fire than a circle the wagons. I've got the under at 8 teams in, 6 teams out. Didn't think I'd be sitting there saying that, but here we are.
Well, that's going to wrap us up for today here on our Big 12 conference preview. A fantastic conference to talk about. We could have talked about them for probably 3 hours if we're being completely honest. We might have run our voices dry, but I think we'd still have been able to do it. But we got more of these conference previews coming your way later this week, folks. We got a few more big-time conferences to talk about. We still got Mountain West, still got Pac-12 to discuss. We got some other small major conferences to get to as well. Right here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, we are available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well. Go smash that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, apologies to the Lawyer family. Go Wildcats. And until tomorrow, peace out.